Question 790. An escrow agent would debit the seller of an income-generating property for which of the following? A. Prepaid insurance. B. Prepaid taxes. C. Prepaid rent. D. All of the above. Correct answer is C. Prepaid rent. Debits are amounts owed or charges that reduce the seller's proceeds. Credits are amounts received or items that increase the seller's proceeds, or reduce the buyer's amount due. When an income-generating property, like a rental property, is sold, rent is typically paid by tenants in advance. If the closing occurs mid-month or mid-period for which rent has already been collected by the seller, the buyer is entitled to the portion of that rent that covers the period of their ownership. Therefore, the seller has collected money for a period when the buyer will own the property. To ensure fairness, the escrow agent will debit the seller for the amount of rent that applies to the buyer's period of ownership and credit that same amount to the buyer. This essentially transfers the prepaid rent from the seller to the buyer at closing. If the seller has prepaid insurance beyond the closing date, they would typically receive a credit for the unused portion of that insurance, as the buyer would usually obtain their own new insurance policy. The buyer would be debited for their new insurance policy's prepaid premiums. If the seller has prepaid property taxes beyond the closing date, they would receive a credit for the unused portion of those taxes. The buyer would then be debited for their share of the taxes from the closing date forward.